Property tax relief is a key priority at the Capitol this session, but when it comes to how to provide relief, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dade Phelan have different ideas, and that divide is getting personal. We've told you about the different tax relief plans approved in the House and the Senate. The Lieutenant Governor wants to cut property taxes by raising the homestead exemption. That's the amount of a home's value that's exempt from property taxes. Right now, the exemption is $40,000. The Senate plan would raise it to $70,000. But House lawmakers are aiming for a different approach. Their plan tightens the cap on home appraisals. Right now, the state puts a 10% limit on how much a home's taxable value can rise each year. The House plan aims to control tax bills by cutting that cap to 5%. Now it's up to the Budget Conference Committee to work out the differences. That usually plays out behind the scenes at the Capitol, but the Lieutenant Governor is putting a spotlight on his differences with the Speaker. He turned to name-calling in TV interviews, calling Speaker Phelan California Dade. And that's a reference to problems in California after that state approved appraisal caps. Patrick also threatened to force the governor to call a special session by not moving key legislation that needs to pass. Phelan responded on Twitter with a bit of humor. He posted shirtless pictures of himself standing between two surfboards, making fun of the California Dade reference. The message said, quote, he's stoked for some tasty waves on the Texas coast this summer and after the end of the regular session. Patrick responded with his own Twitter post, editing his face onto a picture of a surfer. He wrote, "The Senate's homestead exemptions are the better wave to ride." It seems silly, but there is actually a lot at stake here. We want to dig a little deeper, and for insight, we're bringing in two reporters from the Capitol Press Corps. James Berrigan is from the Texas Tribune, and Nikki Griswold with the Austin American-Statesman. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Sure, you've both been following this. There is wide support for property tax relief. How did this agreement on how to provide relief turn so divisive?
Well, I think it's been divisive since the beginning. Everybody wants to provide some type of property tax relief for Texas taxpayers. But the difference is how to do that. The Senate wants to increase the homestead exemption. The House wants to cap appraisals. And so there's been this just head bumping throughout the entire session that's really come to a head over the last week with now personal laws being thrown across the chamber. And I don't expect that to let up. I think that fighting is going to continue over the next couple of weeks as we head into the end of the session, and it might just come down to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, this really, like you said, started even before the conference committee was named, and it seems like it's been brewing for a while.
For sure. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dade Phelan really don't hide their dislike of each other. It's very clear that they do not get along. And that was evident this week with Dan Patrick over the last couple of weeks really going on a media blitz about the Senate's property tax proposal. And this week, really, those personal attacks like California Dade for a Beaumont, Texas native, that's really strong.
And Nikki, you have also been covering another conflict between the House and Senate over using public money to pay for private schools. What is the divide there?
Well, I think the divide comes where in support, we saw the Senate advance pretty quickly, Senate Bill 8, which would create education savings accounts for students to use towards private school tuition, homeschooling, tutoring, out of public funds, and that hasn't made much headway in the House. We saw the House equivalent of that bill get a hearing a few weeks ago, and there hasn't been much movement since then. We could still see it advance out of that committee and onto the floor, and that's where another really spirited debate would happen, but I think we just see a lot more hesitation when it comes from rural Republicans who are worried about the health of their public schools.
You've both spent a lot of time at the Capitol, obviously. Does the tension between Phelan and Patrick extend to the members that you've seen at all?
That's a great question. I do sense a little bit of frustration, perhaps, from members in both chambers who have priority bills that are, perhaps not making as much headway in the opposite chamber. But I think the members keep it pretty civil and leave it up to their leaders to do more of the battling on that front. I don't know if James agrees with me.
I think it's your regular interchamber feuding. I don't think that there's particular dislike between the senators and the state representatives, but it is the regular if you don't respect us, expect us kind of deal that they're always throwing around.
Everyone's talking about the possibility of a special session. Do you really think that that's likely to happen?
I think if enough of either the governor's or the lieutenant governor's priorities don't make it across the finish line, I think it's a good possibility. Neither of them have been very shy about hinting that that might happen, and you know, the lieutenant governor, while he doesn't have the ability to call a special session, he can certainly do his best to force one, and so we might see some of those moves being pulled out in the final weeks we have ahead.
Good possibility. You think the same?
I think that's certainly the dark cloud hanging over the Capitol right now.
What do we need to be watching for in the coming weeks as we kind of round out the last part of the session?
I think some of these hot button issues, whether they, you know, make it across the finish line, is something I'm keeping an eye on. You know, the Senate has been pretty swift in moving a lot of their priorities and somewhat controversial legislation off to the lower chamber, and you know, what happens to those bills there, especially as we have the clock ticking down, is something I'm keeping my eye on, certainly.
I think it's property taxes, the school choice education bill, that's going to be a big fight, and the bills targeting trans kids and people, as well as the higher ed the bills with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and trying to end tenure. Those are really big issues for social conservatives that they want to see moved, as expressed by the lieutenant governor. And if they don't move, I think that the probability of a special session becomes larger.
Exciting.
For us, yes.
Yes.
All right, James, Nikki, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
When a Texas hospital sued hundreds of patients for medical debt, some turned to our investigative team for help. How they're now getting results from lawmakers at the Capitol.